October 15th, 1874. High country, Montana territory. Snow was coming down. Not hard, not yet, just steady, quiet. The kind that sticks to pine needles and fills the low places. 32 degrees when the sun came up. The air tasted like metal, like iron. The taste that comes before everything freezes. Most men in the territory saw it and knew what it meant. Winter was here. Time to run. Helena had 3,500 people packed inside its boundaries. Bozeman had Fort Ellis and soldiers and walls. Safety in numbers, warmth in crowds. Time to check your woodpile, lock up your stock, pray the roof holds. But Jacob Thornton, Jake to anyone who'd known him longer than a day, looked at that same snow and saw something different. Opportunity. He stood in a clearing he'd picked with the care most men reserved for choosing a wife. Big Belt Mountains, tucked into a fold where the peaks opened just enough to let winter sun pass through. But not so open that the northwest wind could tear through and kill you. 40 feet across, maybe less. Lodgepole pine packed tight on all sides. Natural windbreak that didn't cost a cent. 30 yards east, a creek. Ice forming at the edges now. But it ran year-round. Water when you needed it. The elevation was right, too. High enough that predators, grizzlies mostly, would be denning soon. Low enough that game trails crossed nearby. Elk and deer moving between high summer range and lower winter valleys. Close enough to Helena for emergency supply runs if absolutely necessary. Far enough that nobody would stumble across him by accident. He'd spent weeks finding this spot. Walked hundreds of miles through these mountains, studied drainage patterns, watched animal behavior, noted where avalanches had run in previous winters by reading the scars on the mountainsides, looked for signs other men missed. The way snow accumulated on certain slopes, the direction prevailing winds carved the treetops, the places where ice built up in spring runoff. This clearing was perfect, and perfection mattered when your life depended on it. 34 years old, looked 50, face like dried leather left in the sun too long, eyes that didn't blink much, didn't need to. They'd seen enough that nothing surprised them anymore. Lines around those eyes, deep ones, cut there by wind and distance and years of looking at things most men never see. His beard was thick, streaked with gray that shouldn't be there at his age. Winter did that to men, aged them faster than years alone could manage. Hands like clubs, scarred all over, calluses thick as boot leather. One scar ran from his left thumb to his wrist. Beaver trap that had closed on him in 1859. Nearly lost the hand. Infection had set in. Burned with fever for a week. Survived because an old Crow woman had packed the wound with herbs and changed the dressing twice daily. Another scar across his right palm. Knife fight with a drunk miner in Virginia City. 1866. Miner didn't survive. Jake did. Barely. Working hands. The kind that don't quit. In his right hand, a single-bit axe. Hickory handle, polished smooth by sweat and time. Dark where his grip had been. Every day, for years. Collins pattern head, made in Connecticut. 3.5 pounds of forged steel. The edge was sharp. He'd spent an hour that morning with a whetstone, bringing it to razor keenness, because dull tools killed men as surely as bullets, maybe slower, but just as certain. That axe was everything, his only tool, his only friend, his only chance. He was about to do something insane, build a cabin, right here, right now, with winter already moving in, with the old-timers already saying this one would be the worst they'd seen. Just him, just that axe, and a trick nobody else believed in anymore. He was going to build with frozen wood. The other settlers would have laughed. The townspeople would have called him suicidal. Even the trappers, the few old ones left, would have shaken their heads. You don't build in winter. Everyone knew that. You cut timber in summer, let it season through fall. Build in spring when the weather cooperates. Winter was for survival, for hunkering down, for feeding fires, and waiting for the world to thaw. Jake was doing the opposite, deliberately, intentionally, because he knew something they didn't, something the Norwegians knew, something the Swedes knew, something that had been forgotten in the rush westward, in the stampede for gold and land and progress. How does a man put up a home when the timber's frozen solid, when he's got one axe and nothing else, when the worst season the West has to offer is breathing down his neck like a wolf on a blood trail? How does he stay alive when it drops to 40 below, when the wind screams, when one mistake ends everything? This is about a man who shouldn't have existed anymore. A man carrying knowledge from an age that was already dying. A man who, in the fall of 1874, was going to prove something the modern world had forgotten. That the old methods, the brutal ones, the ones everyone dismissed as outdated, sometimes those were the only methods that worked. Jake Thornton didn't fit anywhere. A ghost in a world that had moved on without him. Born 1840, Missouri frontier, in a cabin his father built before everything went wrong. His old man had been a farmer, bad at it, broke because of bad luck and worse land. Tried growing corn on soil that couldn't support it. Tried raising livestock without adequate winter feed. Made every mistake a man could make and compounded them with stubbornness. Watched crops fail 3 years running. Watched livestock die in winter storms because the barn wasn't built strong enough. Watched the bank take everything piece by piece. By 16, Jake had seen enough dirt and failure. Watched his father break his back for nothing. Watched the land take everything and give nothing back. Watched hope die inch by inch. Watched a strong man become a broken one. His mother had died when he was 12. Fever. No doctor within 50 miles. His father had tried everything. Prayer, whiskey, cold compresses. Nothing worked. She was buried on a hillside overlooking the failed farm. No marker. Just a pile of rocks Jake and his father had stacked. Spring of 1856, he disappeared. Left a note. Didn't say goodbye. Couldn't bear to see his father's face. Joined a trapping crew heading into the Rockies. Rough men led by Thomas Fitzpatrick. They called him Broken Hand. Missing 3 fingers on his left hand from a rifle accident years before. He'd been at the first rendezvous in 1825 when the fur trade was still young and rich. When beaver pelts brought premium prices. When a good trapper could make a year's wages in 3 months. Jake learned from the last generation. Men who'd actually known Jim Bridger, who'd run trap lines with Jedediah Smith before Comanches killed him on the Cimarron in 1831, who'd walked the West before there were maps, before there were trails, before there were settlements. They taught him to read country like text. Animal tracks told stories. Bent grass told stories. Sky, color told stories. Wind direction told stories. Everything told stories if you knew how to listen. They taught him Crow, taught him Shoshone, taught him some Blackfoot, though he hoped never to need it. Blackfoot weren't known for friendly conversations. Taught him how to take beaver, mink, marten, how to set traps in freezing water without losing your fingers, how to skin an animal without dulling your knife, how to stretch a pelt so it dried without shrinking, how to live 12 months on what the mountains gave you. Nothing else. No supply trains, no trading posts, just you and the wilderness. He learned to start fire with a bow drill, patience and pressure and the right kind of wood. Could do it in rain, could do it in snow, could do it with numb fingers. How to tan a hide using the animal's own brain. The brain contained everything needed to soften the leather, nature providing the tools along with the material. How to navigate by stars and sun and the way wind hit your face. How to read moss growth on trees. How to estimate distances across mountain valleys where perspective lied. He learned which plants could heal and which would kill, which roots were edible in spring and which turned poison by fall, which bark could be chewed to stop infection and which mushrooms would stop your heart, which berries sustained and which brought fever dreams and death. He saw wilderness before it was touched, before gold rushes, before homesteaders, before iron rails cut across the prairie like scars, rivers that ran clear, beaver dams so thick you could walk across valleys on them, buffalo herds that took 3 days to pass, elk by the thousands moving through mountain passes. He lived the life that was already turning into myth, freedom and danger and a connection to the land that went deeper than words, deeper than explanation, something you had to live to understand. But by 1874, it was gone. Progress had swept it all away. Beaver were finished, populations destroyed by decades of trapping that never stopped. The streams that once held hundreds now held dozens, and those were wary, trap-smart, barely worth the effort. The big fur companies, Hudson's Bay, American Fur, had either collapsed or moved on to other business, shipping, railroads, real estate, anything but fur. The last rendezvous happened in 1840, the year Jake was born, the symbolic end of an era, the death of a way of life. Old trappers still talked about it in whispers, like mourning a dead friend. By 1870, the government said fur trading was basically over, official acknowledgement of what everyone already knew. The beaver were gone, the buffalo were going, the wilderness was shrinking, mountains were filling up fast, prospectors chasing gold rumors that were mostly lies, ranchers pushing Texas cattle north into Montana grasslands, homesteaders claiming their 160 acres under the Homestead Act of 1862. Free land. Just had to improve it. Build a dwelling, work the soil, prove up in 5 years. They looked at land and saw resources, things to exploit, things to tame, things to break. They saw dollar signs, property lines, ownership, progress, civilization creeping westward like a disease. Jake saw something dying, something being murdered, and he mourned it like you'd mourn a brother, because the wilderness had been his brother, his father, his mother, his only real family. Jake had tried to adapt, scouted for the army during the Indian Wars, led soldiers through country they couldn't read, watched them stumble through terrain he could navigate blindfolded, watched them make mistakes that got men killed. The soldiers were brave. He'd give them that. But bravery without knowledge was just a faster way to die. Guided wagon trains. Families going west to Oregon and California. People who didn't understand what they were walking into. Who brought furniture and pianos and things that mattered back east but meant nothing out here. Watched them discard heirlooms along the trail. Grandmother's rocking chair left beside the Snake River. Piano abandoned in South Pass. Too heavy. Too impractical. The trail took everything that wasn't essential. Hunted for railroad crews. Shot buffalo and elk to feed the men laying track for the Northern Pacific. Watched the iron lines stretch west like chains. Binding the wilderness, taming it, killing it. Each mile of track was another nail in the coffin, another piece of wilderness lost forever. But nothing felt right. He was A stranger in his own country, out of sync with his own time. An artifact walking around in an age of steam engines and telegraph wires and newspapers that arrived in days instead of months. People talked about progress like it was religion, like faster and newer and more was automatically better. Jake wasn't convinced. Late summer 1874, he made his choice. He'd go back into the mountains, back to the old ways, back to a life built on self-reliance and silence. He'd build a cabin, a real home, a place to live out however many years he had left. Away from noise, away from greed, away from civilization's endless march forward, away from the future that had no place for him. He had $340, saved over years, kept in a leather pouch around his neck, tied with rawhide. Never took it off, even slept with it. Every dollar represented weeks of work, guiding, hunting, scouting, each one earned through sweat and skill and risk. Some of those dollars had blood on them, metaphorically, some literally. The frontier didn't pay well for safe work. Bought a pack horse, big gelding, good feet, calm disposition, the kind that wouldn't spook at a bear or bolt during a lightning storm. Paid $40 for it. Steep price, but worth every cent. A bad horse could kill you through inconvenience alone. Examined it carefully before buying. Checked teeth, checked hooves. Watched how it moved, how it reacted to sudden sounds, how it behaved when tied. Bought a Winchester Model 1873 chambered in 4440, the Frontier Standard. The gun everyone wanted, the gun that worked, $35. Another significant investment, but necessary. Could have bought used, could have saved $10. But used meant unknown history, unknown wear, unknown reliability. Not worth the risk. Bought basics, cast iron skillet, coffee pot, wool blanket, 100 pounds of flour, 50 pounds of salt pork, 10 pounds of coffee, salt. Total, $60 for supplies, carefully calculated, enough to get through winter if he supplemented with hunting and trapping. And bought his axe, brand new Collins single bit, $2.50, small price. But it would prove to be the most important purchase of his life. Held every axe in the store, tested weight, tested balance, checked the grain of the hickory, checked the forge marks on the head, chose carefully. Then headed for high country, a place he'd scouted years back. Too remote for ranchers, too rough for farmers, too poor in gold for prospectors. Nobody wanted it, which made it perfect. Found it in a sheltered valley, Big Belt Mountains, 40 miles northeast of Helena. Valley maybe a mile long, half-mile wide, peaks around it rising past 8,000 feet. Perfect, remote, defensible, beautiful. A place where a man could disappear, could live alone, could die alone if it came to that. Summer of 1874 he'd prepared. Hunted elk and deer, made jerky, hung it in canvas sacks from branches high enough that bears couldn't reach. Used techniques he'd learned from the crow, salt and smoke and patience. Built a lean-to, temporary shelter, poles and pine boughs, good enough for rain. Wouldn't survive real winter, but didn't need to. Just needed to last until the cabin was done. Gathered berries, dug roots, ate what the land provided, wild onions, camas bulbs, service berries, everything he could find and preserve, and watched the trees. Found a stand of lodgepole pine, straight, tall, 12 inches across, uniform, perfect for building, marked 60 of them. More than he'd need. Insurance against mistakes, against waste, against the unpredictable. Lodgepole pine, Pinus contorta, the workhorse of the Rockies, grows straight, competing for sunlight in tight stands. Strong wood, light, easy to work with hand tools. Resists rot better than spruce. Doesn't split as easily as fir. The trees he'd selected were mature, 30 to 40 years old. Old enough that the wood was strong and dense, young enough that they weren't full of rot or insect damage. But he didn't cut them. Not yet. He waited. Waited for first snow, for hard freeze, for the temperature to drop below 20 and stay there. Waited for the wood to freeze solid. This was the trick, the secret, the gamble that would either save him or kill him. Learned it from an old Norwegian trapper, Lars Eriksson. Back in 1862, brutal winter near the Yellowstone headwaters. They'd been trapped by early snows, cabin half built, supplies running low, temperature dropping fast, death looking more likely than survival. Lars had shown him how to work with the cold instead of against it, how to turn winter from enemy into ally. Lars grew up in Norwegian forests, where winter wasn't a season. It was a way of life, where men had been working wood for 1,000 years, where knowledge passed father to son across generations. He taught Jake that frozen wood wasn't a curse. It was a gift. Ice crystals in the fibers acted like lubricant. Let the axe make clean, straight cuts. The wood split cleaner than it ever would in summer. Cold made the wood predictable. Less warping, less twisting as it dried. The frozen state locked everything in place. Freezing killed insects, killed fungus in the bark, prevented rot. No bugs survived below zero. Nature's sterilization. And green wood cut in winter seasoned faster, more evenly. Because the sap wasn't flowing, it was dormant, locked in the cells, not bleeding out every time you made a cut, not creating weak spots, not rotting from the inside. It was a secret that went against everything the new settlers believed. They said, cut wood in summer, when it's green and soft. Let it season a year before using it. That was the wisdom passed down from England, from Germany, from places where winter was mild and wood abundant. They said frozen wood was brittle, hard to work, prone to splitting in unpredictable ways, would crack, would fail, would kill you when the roof collapsed. They were wrong. Or more accurately, they were working with different tools, different goals, different understanding. They had sawmills powered by water wheels, oxen teams that could drag enormous logs, time to wait while wood seasoned, money to buy finished lumber if they wanted. Jake had an axe, a horse, and winter coming fast. No time, no money, no alternatives, no safety net. But it was dangerous, a gamble where the stakes were life or death. He would be racing the clock, racing the deepening cold, racing the ever-present threat of blizzards that could bury him and his half-finished cabin in hours, erase all his work, kill him slowly through exposure and starvation. He'd have to work faster, harder, smarter than ever before, had to rely on skill, on strength, on knowledge of methods most people had forgotten, had to become a mountain man again. Not the romantic version from dime novels where everything worked out. The real version. The brutal survival version where one mistake meant death and nobody would find your body until spring. As the first snowflakes of October 15th, 1874 melted on his weathered face, Jake Thornton shifted the axe in his hand, felt its weight, its balance. The hickory was smooth, worn to the shape of his grip, like it was part of his hand, an extension of his will. Waiting was over. Planning was done. Talking was done. Building had begun. October 16th, 1874. 20 degrees overnight, ground frozen hard as iron. His boots rang on it when he walked. Sky was pale blue, hard blue, the kind that promised nothing but cold. Perfect weather for work. Air still, sun out, wood ready. He started dropping trees, 60 lodgepole pines, all within 100 yards, all 12 to 14 inches across at chest height. Marked each one with a knife slash. a blaze on the bark to guide him as he worked. Started closest to the clearing, worked outward, systematic, steady rhythm, axe moving fast, sound echoing through the valley like a drum, lonely sound, defiant sound, announcing his presence to the emptiness. Chop, chop, chop. The axe bit frozen wood with them. A crunch. Chips flew clean and sharp, caught sunlight like ice shards. Ever try to chop down a tree with an axe? Real work. Not movie work. Brutal. Backbreaking. Test of strength and endurance and technique and will. Now imagine doing it in freezing cold, breath coming out in clouds. Hands going numb even through heavy work gloves. Clock ticking. Life on the line. Jake was a master. Thousands of hours with an axe. Maybe tens of thousands. He could read wood grain. See subtle color shifts and texture changes that told him where the wood was strong, where it was weak. Knew how to place cuts for maximum effect. How to use the axe's weight and his swing's momentum. How to let the tool do the work instead of forcing it with muscle alone. Used a technique called the box cut. 4 cuts creating a square notch, angled toward the direction he wanted the fall. First cut downward at 45 degrees, second cut upward meeting the first. Removing a wedge, repeated on the opposite side. Second notch, tree falls toward the deeper notch. Gravity and crown weight guide it down. 10 trees that first day. Massive accomplishment. Strength and skill combined. Each tree took 45 minutes to an hour, depended on size and wood hardness. By sunset, mountains painted orange and purple, he was destroyed, muscles screaming, hands blistered through the gloves. But he felt satisfaction, deep satisfaction, progress. He'd started. Working over the next days, he felt the difference in frozen wood. Axe bit with a clean, decisive sound. Not the dull thud of summer cutting. Chips flew sharp and true, not ragged. Wood split with almost supernatural straightness, like the cold was guiding his hand, making the work easier. Exactly what Lars promised years ago. This is the opposite of common thinking. Most people think wood is a summer material. Work it in warmth and sun when sap flows and the wood is soft. Jake was using cold as a tool, as an ally, as a partner, working with nature, not fighting it. End of first week, October 22nd. All 60 trees were down. The clearing was chaos. Fallen timber everywhere, a forest destroyed by one man and one axe. Next step, limb and buck. Cut off branches. Cut trunks to proper length for cabin walls. Simple one-room design, 12 by 16 feet, walls 7 feet high, low-pitched roof, needed 17-foot logs for long walls, 13 feet for short walls. About 80 logs total, so he'd cut extra. Buffer for mistakes and waste, dawn to dusk, every day, diet of dried elk, hardtack soaked in coffee, occasional pine nuts from fall gathering. Physical toll was immense. Muscles ached bone deep, hands raw and blistered, skin cracking, bleeding, even with bear grease rubbed in every night. Back was constant fire, reminder of every bend, every lift, every swing. But he pushed, driven by urgency sharp as winter air, knowledge that every good weather day was borrowed time, that real cold, killing cold, was coming. Started preparing the foundation, cleared snow from a level spot, scraped down to frozen earth with a flat board, laid down large flat stones, gathered from a rock slide quarter-mile away, hauled back on a travois, 2 poles and canvas, no mortar, dry stacking, fitting stones together like a 3-dimensional puzzle, small stones filling gaps, creating level surface. Foundation kept logs off damp ground, prevented rot, provided insulation from cold earth. Back-breaking work, hauling stones in freezing temperatures, but essential. No foundation meant uneven settling. Logs would twist, warp, whole structure would collapse eventually. Each stone had to be chosen carefully, tested, positioned precisely. Jake would place one, step back, study it from angles, sometimes reject it after 10 minutes. Pull it out, try another. Foundation wasn't about level floors. It was about survival, about building something that would last through a Montana winter that killed men who made mistakes. By November 1st, steady 10 degrees during day, below zero at night, serious cold had arrived. Cold that cut through wool and flannel and settled in bones. Creek frozen solid. White ice ribbon winding through valley. Snow 2 feet deep in clearings. Drifted deeper where trees blocked wind. Jake finished preparing logs. Ready for the hardest, most dangerous part. Notching. Chose saddle notch. Simple, strong, relatively easy to cut with axe. Provided tight fit between logs. Saddle notch, semicircular cut in log's underside, fits snugly over the rounded top of a log below. Trick was uniformity, tight fit keeping out wind and snow and cold. Poor notch left gaps. Gaps meant heat loss. Heat loss meant death. Worked with surgeon's precision. Axe a delicate instrument in powerful hands. Roll log into position on top of 2 parallel base logs. Use a scribe, stick with nail through it, to trace lower log's shape onto upper log's underside. Precise outline of needed notch. Carefully chip away wood. Shave to scribed line. Check fit constantly. Tiny adjustments until log settles with satisfying thunk. Slow, painstaking work. Test of patience and skill and focus. Each notch, 30 minutes, 4 notches per log, 2 each end, 6 or 8 logs per day, dawn to dusk. Frost biting fingers even through gloves. Cold, a living predator. Always waiting, always probing for weakness. Had to stop every half hour. Warm hands over small fire kept burning near work site. Thrust hands into flames until feeling returned in waves of searing, agonizing pain. Welcomed that pain. Meant hands were alive, still functional. Starting to understand the true nature of his gamble. Not just building a cabin, fighting a war against cold. War of attrition. War he couldn't lose. Every day a battle. Every log a victory. December 1st, 1874. Minus 15 degrees. World transformed into symphony of white and blue. Beautiful, deadly, utterly indifferent to his struggle. Cabin walls at waist height, 4 feet. Small fortress rising from snow-covered clearing. But cold was winning. Relentless grinding pressure wearing him down. Hands a mess of cracked, bleeding skin. Knuckles swollen. Raw. Frostbite, constant gnawing pain. Burning that never stopped. Deep hacking cough shaking his whole body. Phlegm streaked with blood. Losing weight. Face gaunt. Hollow-eyed. Cheekbones standing out like ridges. Burning more calories than taking in. Body consuming itself to stay warm. Starting to doubt. Wonder if he'd made a fatal mistake. If pride and stubbornness led him to this frozen grave. One evening, sitting by his fire in the lean-to, gnawing dried elk hard as leather, heard a sound that froze his blood, long mournful howl rising and falling on wind. Then another. Wolf pack? Dozens strong. Voices echoing through valley like lost souls crying. Chilling reminder he wasn't alone in this fight for survival. Just one creature among many. All fighting to stay alive in brutal, unforgiving land. Wolves were hungry, driven by same desperation, gnawing his own belly. Tangible threat. Physical manifestation of dangers surrounding him on all sides. Sleepless night. Winchester in lap, finger on trigger. Listening to wolves circle camp. Heard them moving through trees. Paws crunching frozen snow. Breath in vapor clouds. Saw eyes glowing yellow in darkness, reflecting firelight. Testing him, probing for weakness, waiting for mistake. But also a catalyst. Adrenaline jolt cutting through exhaustion and doubt. Reminded him why he was here, what he was fighting for. Not just building cabin, building a life. Life of freedom, self-reliance, deep connection to natural world. Life worth fighting for, worth suffering for, worth risking everything for. Next morning, December 2nd, woke with renewed purpose. Fire in belly having nothing to do with meager breakfast. Would not be defeated. Would not break. Would finish or die trying. Worked with feverish intensity over next 2 weeks. Mind numb to cold. Focus laser sharp on task. Finished cabin walls. Logs fitting together with tightness, proving his skill and determination. Walls rose to 7 feet. Solid barrier against wind and snow. Cut openings. Door on south side, small window on east. Door opening 3 feet wide, 6 feet tall. Window opening 2 feet square, just big enough for light, for seeing out. Frame them with smaller hand-hewn timbers, carved with same axe, same hands. Mid-December, December 15th, temperature dropped to -35. Air so cold it hurt to breathe. Seared lungs with every breath. Trees groaned and cracked in frozen silence. Sound like rifle shots echoing. World seemed stopped, frozen in suspended animation. Even wolves had gone silent, hunkered in dens, waiting for cold to pass. Jake now working on roof. Most dangerous, most difficult part. Had to lift heavy roof logs into place, 15 feet up. No ropes, no pulleys, no block and tackle, no help. Alone. Had to figure it out. Used technique he'd seen Norwegian loggers use, called skidding. Leaned 2 long poles, 20 feet each, against cabin side at steep angle. Creating ramp. Tied rope around one end of roof log, looped other end over shoulder, then dragged log up ramp, inch by agonizing inch. Boots slipping on icy poles, muscles screaming, brutal, exhausting work. Test of pure, raw strength and willpower. Each roof log over 100 pounds. Had to lift 20 of them. Working on last roof log, December 23rd. Massive 20-foot lodgepole pine serving as ridgepole. Central beam supporting entire roof structure. Managed to slide it halfway up skids. Body straining. Right foot slipped on ice patch. Fell. Body crashed against cabin side. Impact knocked wind out. Massive log teetered above him. Balanced on wall edge, swaying like pendulum. Lay there, stunned. Body a symphony of pain. Looked up at log. Dark, menacing shape against gray winter sky. Knew if it fell, it would crush him. End life instantly. Trapped. Pinned between cabin wall and log, unable to move. Closed eyes. Resignation washing over him. This was it. How it ended. Gambled and lost. Pushed too far, too hard, now paying the price. Then heard it, voice from past, memory so vivid, almost real. Lars Eriksson, old Norwegian trapper, speaking across years. Mountain gives, Jacob, Lars had said. Voice low rumble. But also takes. Must be strong. Must be smart. Must be worthy. If worthy, mountain lets you live. Jake opened eyes. Would not die here. Would not surrender. Would be worthy. Surge of adrenaline from somewhere outside himself. Scrambled out from under log. Body moving with speed and agility he didn't know remained. Log held. Balanced on wall edge. Swaying gently. Second chance. Reprieve from death. Spent rest of December 23rd securing ridgepole. Body screaming. Mind laser-focused beam of pure will. Used smaller logs as braces, wedging them under ridgepole holding it. By nightfall, ridgepole secure. Cabin skeleton complete. Survived. Next 2 days, Christmas Eve and Christmas, finishing roof. Laid smaller logs, 6 inches diameter, across ridge pole, spaced foot apart, covered logs with thick layer of pine boughs, mat of green needles, on top of pine boughs, laid sod layer. Cut from ground before freeze, heavy chunks of earth and grass roots providing insulation and waterproofing. Roof crude, but functional, would keep out snow and rain. Turned attention to gaps between logs, spaces letting in wind and cold. Chinked gaps with mixture of moss, clay, small stones, packed tight with stick. Moss gathered from north side of trees where it grew thick. Clay dug from creek bank, breaking through ice to get it. Mixed moss and clay with little water, creating sticky, pliable, paste-filling gaps, hardening as it dried. Natural insulation, technique used for centuries. Built small stone fireplace in northwest corner. Same dry stacking technique as foundation. Fireplace 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep. Chimney rising through roof. Use flat stones for hearth and sides. Smaller rounded stones for chimney. Left small opening at chimney top. 6 inches square, letting smoke out. Fireplace crude, but would work. Would provide heat and cooking space. Evening of December 26, 1874. Temperature outside soul-crushing, -40. Jake Thornton lit first fire in new home. Used flint and steel. Struck spark into small pile of dry pine needles and shavings. Spark caught. Needles smoldered. Gently blew, coaxing flame to life. Fire caught. Flames dancing and crackling in stone fireplace. Sound a symphony of warmth and life. Cabin began warming. Slowly first, then quicker. Air filled with smell of wood smoke and pine. Comforting, familiar. Warmth a physical thing, living presence wrapping around him, seeping into bones, chasing away cold and fear and loneliness. Constant companions for past 2.5 months. Done it. Built home with just axe and frozen pine. Heart of Montana winter. Against all odds, against all reason. Sat by fire, body battered, bruised, hands roadmap of pain, face gaunt, hollow-eyed, but spirit soaring. Faced worst wilderness could throw. One. Proven old ways, hard ways, forgotten ways weren't dead, just waiting for someone with courage and skill and sheer stubborn determination to remember them. Winter 1874-75 slowly gave way to spring. Legend of Jake Thornton and winter cabins spread through valleys and mountains of Montana territory. Other trappers, prospectors, settlers emerging from own winter ordeal, gaunt and weary and grateful for survival, heard story, came to see. Rode or walked 40 miles from Helena, following directions. Found small sheltered valley and Big Belt mountains. Amazed by what they saw. Small, sturdy cabin, 12 by 16 feet, built with precision and craftsmanship, almost unheard of on frontier. Logs straight and uniform, notches tight and clean, chinking solid and weatherproof. Looked like team of skilled carpenters with full tools built it. Not one man with single axe. Testament to skill, to knowledge, to power of human will. Asked how he'd done it. How built cabin in dead of winter with just axe. Jake, man of few words, man who spent more time with mountains than men, showed them. Took them to lodgepole pine stand, now thinned by his work. Showed how to select right trees, how to fell with box cut, how to limb and buck to proper length. Showed secret of frozen wood. Weigh it split clean and straight. Weigh cold made it predictable and easier to work. Showed saddle notch, dry stacked foundation. Moss and clay chinking, shared knowledge freely, without any thought of profit or reward. Because that was mountain man way, old-timer way. Knowledge meant to be shared, not hoarded. Technique of building with frozen pine. Technique all but forgotten, brought to American frontier by Norwegian and Swedish immigrants, but never catching on. was reborn, spread through valleys and mountains of Montana territory like wildfire. Past settler to settler, trapper to trapper, new piece of frontier wisdom saving lives and time and wood. Men planning to wait until spring now started in winter, using Jake's technique. Found they could build faster, wood easier to work, finish cabins tighter and more weatherproof. Here's the wild part connecting Jake's story to our time. Principles Jake used in 1874 still relevant today. Maybe more relevant than back then. Idea of using local materials, working with natural wood properties, building home in harmony with environment, understanding nature not as enemy to conquer, but partner to respect. These are very principles of modern sustainable building. Green architecture, tiny house movement, tools changed. We have chainsaws and power drills and laser levels. But wisdom remains same. Best buildings work with nature, not against it. Jake Thornton lived in cabin rest of his life. Life longer than anyone expected. Never married, never had children, never sought fame or fortune. Lived quiet, solitary life, trapping in winter, hunting in summer, tending small garden in brief growing season, living off land as always done, became legend in territory. Man sought out for knowledge and skill. Young men came asking to learn old ways, taught them patiently, without judgment. Died spring of 1910 at age 70. In cabin built with own hands 36 years before. Died peacefully in sleep. By fire that warmed him through countless winters. Found him sitting in chair, faint smile on weathered face, as if seeing something in flames that pleased him. His cabin still stands today, over 150 years later. Silent, enduring monument to man who built it and knowledge he carried. Preserved by Montana Historical Society. Protected landmark. Place where people can see what one man could accomplish with nothing more than axe, frozen pine, and will to survive. Testament to power of self-reliance. Importance of traditional knowledge. Indomitable spirit of American frontier. Reminder that sometimes old ways are best ways. That sometimes greatest challenges can be overcome with nothing more than skill, determination, and deep respect for natural world. One man, one axe, one Montana winter, cabin that refuses to fall.